William, welcome to Life Science Success Podcast. It's
Thanks
great to
for
have
having
you
me
here.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks a lot. And first of all, what do you think of bio so far?
Bio's been great. So we've had a ton of meetings, great discussions. We have fantastic data to update people on. So whenever you have good data, it turns out to be good meetings.
Especially
Yeah.
whenever the lines of the show. Like great
Yeah.
time to like shine that giant spotlight.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
great thing. So William, would you mind just telling the listeners a little bit about yourself? What brought you to life sciences?
Sure. So I trained as a physician. So I trained in internal medicine and geriatrics. I thought I was a pretty good doctor. I enjoyed being a doctor, but I always felt that there was a part of my brain that I wasn't using. So as a doctor, you are rewarded for good recall, pattern recognition, and a good bedside manner, working with people. Um, what I didn't get to use was analysis, looking at numbers, strategy, public speaking, things that I thought I was pretty good at, but we're not going to get rewarded as a
Sure.
practicing physician. So I went to business school during my fellowship, and I ended up working for Boston Consulting Group for a few years, and then at Novartis for 11 years. And then since then, I've been in biotech. So I've been with Passage Bio for the last 2 years.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And in terms of the patient aspect of it,
Yeah.
do you ever miss getting to go and treat patients?
I'll tell you, the part that I miss is making those really meaningful relationships with patients and their families. And
Mm-hmm.
when you actually make an impact on their lives, it's there's a real emotional connection. So I don't have that directly anymore, but what we are trying to do is make an emotional impact with the
For
treatments that
sure.
we come up with.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's different, but I try and interact with the patient community and meet patients and meet family members as much as possible because it reminds me of that same warm feeling that I got as a doctor that I love so much that we can try and achieve as a pharmaceutical company.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you could definitely touch many more lives. It's just always that sort of one-on-one contact
Right.
that I frequently hear that,
Yeah.
somebody that's gone through your journey of physician to now CEO is it's just a different level of
It's a
interaction.
different
And
level of
yeah,
interaction.
yeah,
Yeah.
very good. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about Passage Bio. What is it that you're
Sure,
working on?
sure. So we are a gene therapy company focused on one-time treatments for neurodegenerative disease. We have one program in the clinic right now. We're in the midst of a phase 1/2 study. The indication is frontotemporal dementia. So frontotemporal dementia, that's what Bruce Willis unfortunately has been diagnosed with. We have a particular genetic subset of FTD. It's patients with a mutation in the granulin gene. So they don't make enough of a protein called progranulin. And our one-time AAV therapy essentially gives them replacement progranulin.
Very good.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's interesting to me, like how long, let's just take Bruce Willis as an example,
Yeah.
how long he made it in his life without showing any sort of, oncoming dementia. And then all of a sudden, from afar, it just looked like it just took over his life really quickly.
Yeah.
And what a tragedy.
Yeah, it really did. So FTD is the most common early onset dementia. So unlike, say, Alzheimer's, FTD comes on with patients in their 40s to 50s.
Mhm.
And the genetic variants have a pretty rapid progression. And so it's about 7 years from diagnosis to ultimately mortality. So it's pretty rapidly progressing disease. There's a lot of, as you heard with Bruce Willis, he had speech problems in the beginning, and so that is one of the hallmarks of it. Is patients may get a type of aphasia with FTD. There's also emotional changes. So there is sometimes a loss of empathy in patients that is particularly hard for family members because the patient becomes a completely different person over time. With the genetic form of the disease, it's particularly troubling for family members because it is 100% penetrant. So if you have the GRN mutation, you are going to ultimately get FTD. And
Wow.
so there is a particular urgency around getting treatments for FTD with these genetic mutations.
And what are kind of the indications that would lead somebody to investigate it more? So what would tell them that, hey, you should probably be tested to see if you have any of the indicators to lead to
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So the diagnosis for frontotemporal dementia is really a clinical diagnosis, and it is a constellation of clinical symptoms such as word finding issues, such as behavioral changes, and it's a little tricky to diagnose because these are subtle changes, and sometimes they get misdiagnosed as, say, bipolar disorder or other psychiatric issues. And so the diagnosis is sometimes tricky, and particularly for for patients with the genetic version, sometimes there's a family history that you can say, mom had this also, so maybe we can think of it. But not every case is genetic. In fact, the majority of cases are not genetic. So I think there's between us and many other biotech and pharmaceutical companies that are seeking treatments for FTD, the more potential treatments there are, the better the diagnosis is.
Mhm.
It's always been like that in clinical medicine. So
Right.
if there isn't something you could do about a disease, there is less impetus to go look
Right.
for it. And so now that we're developing more treatments, I think the diagnosis rate is going to improve and the genetic testing rate is actually going to improve.
So tell me a little bit about so where are you at today with
Sure.
Passage Bio, and how's your development coming?
Yeah, so for this lead indication, we are in the midst of a phase 1/2 study. And that's what we're doing here at Bio. We're updating people on how that study is going. We have treated 5 patients so far in this study, and we've shared data from the first 3 patients. And what we're seeing is pretty exciting. So like I said before, these patients with FTD-GRN, they are missing progranulin. That's what is too low, and that is the proximal cause of their illness. And our gene therapy replaces progranulin. And we've been able to achieve progranulin levels that are very high. So up to levels of 22 to 27. The normal range is 3 to 8. And I say those numbers because they're important comparing our program to other investigational programs that have shown data. We really like the levels that we're getting to. They're much higher than any of the other investigational programs that we've seen data from. And so it's exciting. So from a competitive standpoint, we feel we're very well positioned in a very attractive market. And then most importantly, from a patient benefit standpoint, we believe by getting to these very high levels, we have the best chance of, on average, across treating many patients, of showing clinical benefit. And so it's exciting. It's always exciting to have clinical data. It's even more exciting when your data is really differentiated.
Sure, yeah, for sure. And so, in terms of the path forward,
hmm
what do you sort of see before that has to happen between now and when the drug actually would be released? When do you think when do you envision that it would actually be on the market?
Yeah, so this is a phase 1/2 study, so we have to look at safety and early efficacy from this program, and then there has to be a conversation with the regulators about the design of a larger confirmatory study. And so that study will take time. So follow up in neurodegenerative disease, you have to follow up for at least a year to see any difference from a comparator group. So there is there's going to be some time. There's going to be some time before this can reach the market. I think what's exciting is that because between us and others in the field, there's so many opportunities to join clinical studies. There's just been a big influx in interest from
Right.
patients in getting genetically tested, getting into studies. This is a devastating disease, and there's no treatments for it right now at all. Um, when we shared some of our data, our first data at the end of last year, we saw a huge uptick in patients being interested in the coming into our study. So we know there's a lot of interest in treatment. And so eventually we're going to get there to get it out to a broad group of
Yeah, I
patients.
would imagine. I would imagine for families, right, that are hearing about this, they would just be so excited to, have any form of actual treatment that might help their loved one, right? So,
Well, that is the exciting part of this business is we are working on hope.
right,
And one of the things that really, really inspires me is at one of these uh, patient meetings, it was American FTD Society. They put on a big patient meeting, and we talked to a young woman. She came up to us and she said, "Okay, you guys are doing gene therapies. When are you going to be ready to treat asymptomatic patients? Because I have the mutation. My father had this. I watched his course. I'm fine right now, and I'm ready for a treat."
mhm,
And so we talked to her that eventually we want to get there. We have to start with symptomatic patients first, but we want to get to be able to treat asymptomatic patients. But I felt her urgency. I
sure.
mean, you can imagine if
Well,
you're
yeah,
carrying that gene and you've seen your relative. I felt her just the amount of
right.
urgency she had. When are you going to get there? And honestly, that's what drives us. I shared that with everyone in the company, and I think about her all the time, actually.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing overall, and amazing to think, that someday that these people will have a treatment as well. That
Yeah,
that there is that hope
absolutely.
in the world.
Absolutely.
What are you hoping to get out of bio? So while you're here, what's the big thing that you're looking for?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for us is keeping people updated on where we are with our program, and making sure that people have seen the progress we've made in generating really differentiated clinical data. So that is our most important goal, is keeping people abreast of where we are and also expectations for later this year and for next year as well.
Well, William, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here, and wish you the greatest success in the shortest amount of time, because I know people really need this. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot.